The scripture reading today is a very fundamental and important one. That this I that we think of as ourself cannot see God, certainly. And yet this I that we are trying to think of, that we're trying to remember, the one who created everything, that alone can see God. God only can see God. Master described intuition as the soul's power of knowing God. In the awareness of Him, we must use that awareness. In His love for us, we must use that love to love Him. This is a very subtle point, very difficult to understand. Easy, yes, in the end. Once you understand, it's very easy, but getting to that point of understanding is the riddle of the spiritual path. Because when God created the universe, He put Himself in every tiny atom. As Master says in Autobiography of a Yogi, every atom is dowered with individuality. And really, if you were to go to some other planet, no matter which planet, you would find the same situation prevailing as here. Because the human situation will not be improved even by some glorious Eden. The human situation is always founded on the thought, I want, I don't want, I like, I don't like, I suffer, I want to get out of suffering. It all ties back to the ego. And that's how people, although all over the world they seem very different, once you get down into it, there's the same old ego, having the same old desires. Everybody wants food, everybody wants comfort, everybody wants love, everybody wants peace of mind, but it's always with the thought that when I have it, I'll be contented. And it's really very much like a description I heard many years ago, that if you take a little bit of skin in your forefinger and thumb and squeeze and squeeze and squeeze until it really hurts, and then you let go, oh, it feels so good. But what feels good? The fact that it isn't squeezing anymore, isn't it? And so it is that here we live in a world where we are pinched by all sorts of desires. And the reason that a desire fulfilled feels good is quite simply because it stopped pinching. The joy of a fulfilled desire is not joy. It's just a release from this pinching. It's a release momentarily from the pain of thinking, I won't be happy until I get that. And then after a while, we get that, and we feel very happy, let's say, with that new Porsche. And after a week, it's kind of old stuff, so we try to recapture the old joy that we first felt by showing it off to all our friends. And they like it, and so we feel good about it. After a while, they take it for granted, we take it for granted, we're off for something else. But all of life, no matter what planet you go to, it's got to be the same thing. This ego trying to escape from its prison and to realize that it is the infinite self, not the bound self. That is the infinite self is that part which can see God. So when you, for example, concentrate on a photo of Master and concentrate on His eyes, try to love Him with the love He's giving you. You'll find that people think in the beginning, this is one of the very typical and almost necessary delusions people pass through, of thinking, well, but I'll lose something. I don't want to give up myself. Don't worry, you'll never succeed in giving up yourself. You'll always be yourself. This is what I was saying yesterday, that the one thing that you can never get away from is this self. But what you will discover is that God became you and became God again, and there will always be that memory of that separateness, which for a time thought it was separate, and then realized that it was the infinite, really. But that infinite self is the true self, and that memory you'll never get away from, and you'll always be uniquely yourself in that sense. That's why you find that the saints are all so completely individualistic. People aren't. People take their values, their opinions, their personalities, their characteristics from their environment. Saints don't. They just are themselves, and sometimes it's a very inconvenient self. They don't care. They're just themselves. Lahiri Mahashai was so kind and loving to everybody. Sri Yukteswar was loving, yes, but. I remember I said to Master, I saw such love in Sri Yukteswar's eyes. He said, there was no love in those eyes. What a thing to say, because he knew there was love there, but it wasn't in his eyes. It wasn't in his outward. It wasn't in his outward personality. Love, Master had so much love, but boy, could he be hard too, depending on whether he wanted to help you or not. If you were just somebody who wasn't trying to help you, he would just pour out love. If you were a disciple, then he would also discipline you. But that was with even deeper love, because he wanted to help you. But every saint is a very different expression of that one infinite. In fact, you'll never really become yourself until you know God. You won't lose yourself. You'll find yourself in Him. You'll find that spark of individuality that God put in you, and that you allowed to become encrusted with all sorts of other kinds of ideas and influences. As you shed those, as there's nothing left of that personality, then suddenly you find that there is something that is just you. And you'll never be anything but that. So don't borrow from other people unless you try to live as saints live. But always remember, what you need to do is get back into yourself. So the essence of the spiritual path, the essence of this teaching, is that, yes, man cannot find God, man cannot know God, but God can know God. And if we want to know God, we must get away from this human self and understand that divine self. Now, this is all philosophy, beautiful, exalted, and we've heard it and read it many a time. The question comes, how? And there you have a real problem, because it's not so easy. I remember years ago, I was working on becoming humble. I'd had a lot of intellectual pride, and I was working on getting rid of this. And I woke up one morning finding that I was really getting quite proud of my humility. It just sneaks in the back door. You have to constantly beware. But the best way to beware is to not live so much in the ego and more in Him. Now, how are you going to do that? One is quite simply to feel that you are not just this little body, that you are not limited by this human form, that even when you meditate, when you walk, when you do everything, feel that your aura is much bigger than your body, that it is expressing through your body, but it is not limited to it. The more you can do that, the more you will find that there is some higher self coming through, and that is the self that Master had. When I looked into his eyes, I never saw a personality there. Because when you see most people's eyes, there's always, by personality I mean a reaction, a personal reaction. I like, I don't like. I'm angry, I'm happy. It pleases me to be with you and displeases me to be with you. These little attitudes that flicker through the mind are what sum up a human personality, with all its traits, its likes and dislikes, its attachments, its fears. These are the things that you see when you look into people's eyes, usually. I remember Master saying to a new disciple, I was watching you working down there, but I wanted to see your eyes, and when you looked up, then I could see, because the eyes tell the story. The eyes, as you've often heard, are the window of the soul. And when I looked into Master's eyes, there wasn't anything of that. There wasn't any thought of I'm pleased or I'm displeased. When he scolded, I felt badly for him. I knew he didn't want to scold, and I also knew that he didn't feel angry. I could see there was complete calmness there, but that it was hurtful to have to talk like that because I'd been stupid in some way. We all are. And we all think that once we've reached the age of 21 or whatever, that we're through with being disciplined. Well, okay, if that's what you want. But really, it's only the beginning of life. They say life doesn't even begin until 40, in fact. You can see in people's faces, the first 40 years, they have more or less what they were born with, what karma dished out to them. The years after that show the face that you've produced yourself with your reactions. And some people's faces are full of all sorts of disappointments and sorrow and suffering and pain, and others are full of joy. That's why that slideshow of mine is so really very effective, because it's called Different Worlds, and I'm sure most of you have seen it, but it's a slideshow showing people in many different countries, many different walks of life, many different races, many different levels of society, and you can see that there are certain rules that go through all of them. That those who live peaceful and giving lives have peacefulness and joy in their eyes. And those who live thinking me, 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 from the smallest to the oldest, they're all the same. There's one of this teenage girl in Lugano sitting at a coffee table with her cigarette there, sort of looking all blasé. She couldn't have been more than 18, and she still already looked like an old person. And I've seen some people in their 80s, 90s, full of joy. I remember meeting Frank Laubach, and it was such a, he was a Christian missionary, and he wrote the book, Letters to Truth Seekers. Letters of a Modern Mystic. And it's a beautiful book, really, because he decided deliberately to undergo an experiment and to try to keep the thought of God in his mind all the time. And not just third person, but second person, you. And everything he thought with God or to God. And he lived that life. I met him when he was in his late 80s, 86 or something, and he said, well, I'm suffering from an incurable disease. I sort of expressed, as one would, sort of sympathy or something. He said, yes, old age. But he was so full of joy and simplicity and goodness. God willing, all of you will be like that. Let us all live in such a way that we can live up to that poem of Yeats's, grow old along with me, the best is yet to be, the rest of life, the last of life for which the first was made. All of life is a preparation finally for what we're here for in the first place, God, to know Him. There are two ways to get to that. One is to be a humble devotee and to feel that everything we're doing is in service to God. This is beautiful. Others is a more Vedantic approach, but it's also would be more our approach, the feeling that we're always in God, that we expand this ego, not reduce it to nothing, but expand it to infinity. And we can also reduce it in other ways. For example, animals don't have any ego, not like you and me. They have some, but very little. They have more, because there's no sense of sort of weighing things and figuring things out, and is this good, is this wrong, whatever. They obviously don't have as much awareness as we have. They aren't as evolved. But this is a curious thing. Lahiri Mahashaya was conducting experiments to try to figure out a way to liberate animals. On the one hand, I think it's beautiful to do that. On the other hand, I think, oh, that's not fair. Ramana Maharshi's cow was liberated. I imagine it was a very high soul. Listen, I'm talking a few things here that anybody who's new, you'll think I'm absolutely daft. Okay, let it be. But for instance, Anandamoyi Ma, there was a fly that kept wanting to settle on her head, and they kept shooing it away, and somebody was all set to swat it, and she said, no, let it be. And then she explained, she said, it's a saint who incarnated in that form so he could be close to me. And he lived as a fly for a day and then left. If we could all die the way flies do. You know, most insects even, they're on their backs and struggling to get out. And you see a fly, if we could let it go the way they do. But to be able to, you know, I had a very strange experience quite recently, just a few weeks ago. For several days, you're going to laugh. For several days, I felt as if I was a dog. I don't mean I felt I had a tail that wagged, but I felt as if I was looking at everything the way a dog does, without just looking. Not saying, is it good, is it bad? Do I like it, do I not like it? Just... Now, you know, that's not a bad way to be, really. Instead of putting the stamp of judgment on everything, just say, well, it is this way. And animals could surely find God easily if it weren't for the simple lack of sufficient awareness to want something more. Human beings have an ego, and it's not a curse, it's a good thing, but it needs to be developed in a good way. Ego that takes pride in itself and takes everything back to itself takes a few lifetimes, let's say. In the book, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam explained by Paramhansa Yogananda, there's a passage there where Yogananda explains Omar Khayyam's reasoning, that he says that many who were born at the beginning of this day of Brahma, the beginning of the manifestation of God in this particular phase of creation, are still in delusion at the end of that day of Brahma. I don't know about it. I don't know if I like that. But I guess some people do, or they wouldn't be around. To be going life after life for billions of years, kind of scary. But a human being has such an infinite capacity for kidding himself and for thinking, well, that Porsche didn't do it, but a Rolls Royce will. For thinking that, well, that house by the sea didn't do it, but if I have a mountain to live on. Or for thinking that this wife or this husband didn't do it, but oh, look at that beautiful person over there. And it goes on and on and on. And I doubt very much that Michelangelo continued to be an artist. I think that he went just about as far as his kind of art could go. I mean, anything more muscular, more, it would become grotesque. I think he probably became something quite different. We have so many different things. You're not an artist by your soul. You don't have the soul of a musician. You don't have the soul of anything except that one infinite state. So if you can either go down, which I'm not recommending, but I'm just sharing the fact that I had that odd experience lately, and everything I saw, I was thinking that a dog is looking at this. Or if you just feel God through me, which is of course the Vedantic way, not to go down but up, to soar over the bridge and not fly under it. Our goal as devotees and as yogis is to try to feel that in everything we do, we are not doing it, He is doing it. And the more you can do that, not taking pride of anything, but just say God is doing it, the more you find a sense of freedom. And no matter how well you've done something, and it does not mean that I'm offering you an excuse to do things in a sloppy manner. We should do our very best, but for God. And we should feel God is doing it through us, to the point where nothing you do is ego-centered, but centered in Him. The more you can do that, the more you begin to feel that He is the real doer in your life, in your thoughts, in your feelings. One time, because Yogananda was having trouble with his knees, and we helped him into his car, and he said, you all are so kind to me with your many attentions. And we said, sir, it's you who are kind to us. What are we doing? And he smiled sweetly, and he said, God is helping God. That's his drama. When we can feel that God is serving God, when we can feel that God is eating through us, when we can feel that God is thinking through us, the more we think that way, the ego says, wait a minute, what about me? But the more you can trample on it, the more you discover you never were that ego. The ego is just a bunch of stuff that you accumulated and defined as yourself. But behind that self was the watchful presence. And that watchful presence is who you really are. That can see God. That part of you can know God. Live in the thought that God is serving God. God is loving God. Not, I am serving you, Lord, or I am doing this for you, Lord. Not bad ideas in themselves. I don't mean to take that away from you. If that is your own particular mood or attitude or consciousness, but try to grow to that point where you're not doing it for Him. He's doing it through you, for Himself, you might say, and for Himself in others. And in the beginning, there's that thought of self-deprivation. Gradually, it evolves to the point where you feel so free in that thought that it's a beautiful thought. The less you do it, the more His beauty can manifest, the more His joy can manifest, and it's His love with which He loves all. Master said, I killed Yogananda long ago. No one dwells in this temple but God. Yet he loved everybody. It was not Yogananda who was loving. It was God who was loving through Yogananda. It is God who is loving through the great saints. Let your love for others be that way. He was completely impersonal, and yet he was very personal in that he saw God in everyone, so that the merest stranger would be like a dear friend to him, because it was that same beloved God who was in this form too. Be impersonal, but lovingly impersonal. Love God with God, God loving through you, and love God in all. And you will see that all the problems that human beings manage to accumulate are non-existent except to the extent that we give them reality. Everything is solved in His joy. Yes, God can see God. Man cannot see God. So the answer is, become God.